My ex-husband Marcus was practically grinning as he leaned back in his chair at our divorce hearing. He'd been telling everyone for months that I'd come crawling back, begging for forgiveness. What he didn't know was that I had something in my possession that would wipe that smug smile right off his face. When Judge Harrison opened that manila envelope and began reading, Marcus went from cocky to absolutely terrified in seconds. Here's how I turned the tables on the man who thought he held all the cards. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. 3 years ago, I thought I had married my best friend. Marcus Thompson seemed like everything I'd ever wanted. Ambitious, charming, successful in his marketing firm, and he made me laugh until my sides hurt. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Portland when I accidentally grabbed his cappuccino instead of my latte. He joked that I owed him a proper coffee date, and somehow that turned into 2 years of dating, a beautiful wedding in the Oregon mountains, and what I believed would be a lifetime together. I was working as a freelance graphic designer, building my client base from our home office, while Marcus climbed the corporate ladder. Everything seemed perfect on the surface. We had our dream house in the suburbs, 2 cars, and plans for starting a family. But somewhere around our second anniversary, things began to shift in ways I couldn't quite put my finger on. Marcus started working later, much later. He'd come home after midnight claiming big client presentations or emergency meetings. His phone became glued to his hand, face down on every surface, protected like state secrets. When I'd ask about his day, I'd get vague responses about boring office stuff and subject changes. The man who used to share every detail of his workday suddenly acted like his job was classified information. The intimacy disappeared gradually, so slowly I almost didn't notice until it was completely gone. We went from being that couple who couldn't keep their hands off each other to roommates who happened to share a bed. When I tried to address it, Marcus would blame stress, work pressure, or claim I was being needy. He had a way of turning every concern I raised back onto me, making me question whether I was being unreasonable. But the real red flag came during a company barbecue at his boss's house. I was chatting with Sarah, the wife of one of Marcus's colleagues, when she made an offhand comment about how nice it must be that Marcus could work from home so often. I laughed and told her he was never home. He was always at the office, pulling those long hours. The confusion in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. That night, I confronted Marcus. Where was he really going all those evenings? His response was explosive. He accused me of being paranoid, controlling, trying to sabotage his career because I was jealous of his success. He stormed out of the house and didn't come back until the next afternoon, claiming he'd stayed at his brother's place to cool off. It was the first time he'd ever just disappeared like that, but it wouldn't be the last. The pattern escalated over the following months. Any question about his whereabouts resulted in huge fights, accusations thrown at me, and Marcus disappearing for days at a time. He'd return acting like nothing had happened, sometimes even bringing flowers or expensive jewelry, as if gifts could patch up the growing holes in our marriage. I threw myself into my work, landing bigger design contracts and building relationships with clients who appreciated my creativity. My business was actually thriving, which seemed to irritate Marcus more than please him. He started making snide comments about my little art projects and how I should focus more on supporting my husband's real career. The man who once bragged about my talent to everyone we met was suddenly treating my success like a threat. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in March. I'd gotten home early from a client meeting and decided to surprise Marcus with his favorite dinner. I was in the kitchen when I heard his key in the lock, followed by hushed voices. His voice and a woman's voice. They were at the front door, and I could hear him saying something about me not being home yet. I crept toward the living room and saw them through the window. Marcus with his arms around a petite blonde woman I'd never seen before. They were kissing, and it wasn't some casual peck. This was intimate, familiar, the kind of kiss you share with someone you've been with for a long time. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched my husband of 3 years with another woman right outside our front door. I slipped back into the kitchen, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to fling the door open and confront them both right there. But something stopped me. Maybe instinct, maybe self-preservation. Instead, I grabbed my purse, slipped out the back door, and drove around the neighborhood until I was sure they were gone. When Marcus came home that night, he acted completely normal. Asked about my day, complimented the leftover dinner I'd reheated for him, even suggested we watch a movie together. I sat on our couch next to this man who had just been with another woman hours earlier, and I realized I was living with a complete stranger. Over the next few weeks, I started paying attention differently. I noticed things I'd been blind to before. Receipts in his pockets for restaurants we'd never been to together. Charges on our credit card for jewelry I'd never received. A second phone he kept in his gym bag. The evidence was everywhere once I started looking. But Marcus had gotten comfortable in his deception. He'd grown careless, sloppy even, and that carelessness was about to become his biggest mistake, though neither of us knew it yet. Because while he was busy covering his tracks with me, he was leaving a trail of breadcrumbs that would eventually lead to so much more than just an affair. The woman I'd seen him with wasn't just some fling. Her name was Rebecca Chen, and she worked at a competing marketing firm across town. But their relationship went deeper than romance. They were planning something together, something that involved my husband's company, confidential client information, and a level of betrayal that went far beyond cheating on his wife. I didn't know any of this yet as I lay awake those nights, staring at the ceiling while Marcus slept peacefully beside me. I was still thinking this was just about an affair, about a marriage falling apart, about having to rebuild my life from scratch. I had no idea that Marcus's betrayal was so much bigger than I could have imagined, and that the evidence of it was sitting in a safety deposit box across town, just waiting to be discovered. The safety deposit box discovery happened completely by accident. I was going through Marcus's dresser drawer looking for our insurance papers after a minor fender bender when I found a small brass key tucked inside an old wallet he never used anymore. It was clearly a bank key, but we only had one safety deposit box at First National, and I had the key to that one in my jewelry box. Curiosity got the better of me. The next morning, after Marcus left for his supposed client breakfast, I drove to every major bank in our area. On my fourth stop at Pacific Trust Bank downtown, the key fit. The bank manager, Mrs. Rodriguez, recognized me from when Marcus had listed me as an authorized user on the account 2 years earlier for emergency purposes. He'd never mentioned this box to me since then. What I found inside that metal drawer changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage and my husband. There were USB drives, printed emails, financial documents, and photographs that painted a picture of betrayal so extensive it took my breath away. Marcus hadn't just been cheating, he'd been systematically stealing client information from his company and selling it to competitors, with Rebecca Chen as his primary contact and co-conspirator. The emails between them went back 18 months, detailing how they'd been passing confidential client strategies, upcoming campaign plans, and budget information to Rebecca's firm, Apex Marketing Solutions. They weren't just lovers, they were business partners in corporate espionage. The financial records showed payments totaling over $200,000 that Marcus had been funneling into offshore accounts I knew nothing about. But the most damaging evidence was a series of recorded phone conversations. Marcus had apparently been recording his calls with Rebecca to protect himself, not realizing these recordings would eventually become evidence of their crimes. In one particularly damning conversation, they discussed timing their exit strategy. Marcus would quit his job, we'd get divorced, he'd move to Seattle with Rebecca, and they'd use the stolen client information to launch their own marketing firm. Rebecca's voice came through clearly on the recordings. "Once you're free of Elena, we can really move forward. She's been holding you back anyway, with her little art hobby and clingy behavior." Marcus's response made my blood run cold. "Don't worry about Elena. She's so focused on her design work, she doesn't notice anything else. After the divorce, she'll be struggling to keep her freelance clients while we're building an empire." They had been planning my financial ruin alongside their business venture. The documents showed Marcus had already started moving our joint assets into accounts I couldn't access. He'd taken out a second mortgage on our house without my knowledge, using forged signatures on documents his friend Jake Morrison had notarized. Jake worked at a small legal office and had been helping Marcus restructure our finances to hide assets before filing for divorce. The most chilling discovery was a detailed timeline they'd created. Marcus planned to file for divorce in 6 months, claiming I was mentally unstable and financially irresponsible. He had documentation prepared to show that my freelance income was inconsistent and that I'd been making erratic financial decisions. The plan was to leave me with the house debt, minimal assets, and a reputation damaged enough that my design clients would question working with me. I spent 3 hours in that bank vault, photographing every document, copying every file, and uploading everything to a secure cloud storage account they could never access. The evidence was overwhelming: corporate espionage, financial fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit multiple felonies. This wasn't just divorce court material, this was federal crime territory. When I got home, Marcus was already there, which was unusual for a Wednesday afternoon. He was pacing in the living room, his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. When he saw me, he quickly ended the call and forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey babe, how was your day?" he asked, but there was something different in his voice, a nervousness I'd never heard before. "Fine," I replied, watching his face carefully. "You're home early." "Client meeting got canceled," he said, but he wouldn't make eye contact. "Listen, I've been thinking we should talk about some changes that might be coming." My heart rate spiked, but I kept my expression neutral. "What kind of changes?" Marcus sat down on the edge of our coffee table, facing me with what he probably thought was a sincere expression. "I've been offered an incredible opportunity in Seattle, a chance to really advance my career, make the kind of money we've always dreamed about, but it would mean relocating, starting fresh." "Starting fresh," I repeated slowly. "What about my business here, my clients?" "Well, that's the thing," Marcus said, and now I could see the manipulation beginning. "Your freelance work is great, but it's not really stable, is it? This opportunity could set us up for life. You could always find new clients in Seattle, or maybe take some time to figure out what you really want to do." I nodded thoughtfully, playing along, while my mind raced. He was already starting the narrative. My business wasn't important, wasn't stable, wasn't worth considering in major life decisions. This was the groundwork for the divorce story he'd planned to tell. "When would this opportunity start?" I asked. "Soon," he said, vaguely, like really soon. "We'd need to make a decision quickly." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. That evening, I called my college roommate Lisa Brennan, who'd become a criminal defense attorney in San Francisco. I couldn't tell her everything over the phone, but I gave her enough information to get her attention. She agreed to fly up the next weekend to review what I'd found. Meanwhile, Marcus's behavior became increasingly erratic. He'd disappear for entire afternoons without explanation, then return acting overly affectionate, bringing expensive gifts and talking about our future together. But I noticed he was also quietly cleaning out his home office, taking items to his car when he thought I wasn't looking. The breaking point came on Friday evening. I was in our bedroom when I heard Marcus on the phone in his office, speaking more loudly than usual. The door was slightly ajar, and his voice carried clearly down the hall. "No, Rebecca, we stick to the timeline," he was saying. "I will file the papers next month, claiming she's been unstable and financially irresponsible. My lawyer thinks we can get the house sale to go through quickly if I can prove she's been making bad financial decisions." There was a pause, then, "Trust me, Elena won't fight it. She's always been too soft, too trusting. By the time she realizes what's happening, we'll be in Seattle with everything we need to launch the new firm. Her client list alone is worth a fortune, all those contacts she's built up over the years." My breath caught. They weren't just planning to steal from his current company. They were planning to steal my client database, my professional relationships, everything I'd worked years to build. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I actually felt dizzy. But Marcus had made one crucial error in his planning. He'd underestimated me completely. The soft, trusting wife he thought he could easily manipulate had just spent the week documenting every aspect of his criminal enterprise. And tomorrow, Lisa would help me figure out exactly how to use that evidence to make sure Marcus's carefully laid plans would blow up spectacularly in his face. Lisa arrived Saturday morning with 2 large coffees and the serious expression she wore in courtrooms. She'd barely set foot in my kitchen before I was pulling out printed copies of everything I'd found. For the next 4 hours, we spread documents across my dining room table like detectives working a major case. "Elena, this is incredible," Lisa said, holding up bank statements showing the offshore transfers. "Your husband isn't just cheating, he's running a full-scale criminal operation. Corporate espionage, money laundering, conspiracy, fraud. We're looking at potential federal charges here." She picked up one of the USB drives. "What exactly is on these?" "Client files from Marcus's company. Campaign strategies, budget breakdowns, target demographics, everything their competitors would pay big money to get their hands on. Some of these campaigns are worth millions in billings." Lisa whistled low. "And Rebecca's firm landed how many of these clients after the information was passed along?" I pulled out a spreadsheet I'd created, cross-referencing the stolen information with new business announcements from Apex Marketing. 12 major accounts in the past 18 months. Clients that Marcus's company had been pitching to or working with suddenly jumped ship to Rebecca's firm, always right after Marcus had access to their confidential information. "This is RICO territory," Lisa murmured, referring to the federal racketeering laws. "Organized criminal enterprise, pattern of illegal activity. Elena, your husband could be looking at 20 years in federal prison." The weight of that statement settled over both of us. This wasn't just about divorce anymore. This was about bringing down a criminal conspiracy that had been operating for over a year. Lisa started organizing the evidence into categories. "We need to be strategic about how we handle this. If we tip our hand too early, they'll destroy evidence and disappear. But if we wait too long, they might execute their exit strategy and flee to Seattle." "What do you recommend?" "We build an airtight case first, then we spring the trap. I have contacts at the FBI's white-collar crime division. This kind of corporate espionage falls under federal jurisdiction." She looked up from the documents. "But Elena, once we start this process, there's no going back. Marcus will face serious criminal charges. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about the man I'd married, the person I thought I knew, versus the calculated criminal I'd discovered him to be. He made his choice when he decided to destroy our marriage and steal everything I've worked for. I'm not protecting him anymore. That afternoon, while Marcus was at what he claimed was a golf meeting with clients, Lisa and I drove to meet with FBI Special Agent David Walsh at the Portland field office. Agent Walsh was a lean man in his 40s who specialized in financial crimes and corporate espionage cases. After reviewing our evidence for over an hour, Agent Walsh leaned back in his chair. "This is one of the most well-documented cases I've seen walking through these doors. Mrs. Thompson, your husband and his accomplice have been incredibly sloppy. These recorded phone calls alone are enough to secure convictions." "What happens now?" I asked. "We open a federal investigation. We'll need you to continue acting normally while we gather additional evidence and build the case. Can you do that?" The idea of pretending everything was fine while living with Marcus made my skin crawl, but I nodded. "How long will that take?" "A few weeks, maybe a month. We'll need to coordinate with Marcus's company, analyze the financial transfers, and potentially set up surveillance. The key is making sure we get everyone involved in this conspiracy." Agent Walsh handed me a card with his direct number. "If Marcus becomes suspicious or tries to accelerate his timeline, call me immediately. Do not confront him yourself." Driving home, Lisa grabbed my hand. "You're incredibly brave for doing this. A lot of people would have just filed for divorce and walked away." "He was going to destroy me," I said quietly. "My reputation, my business, my financial security. He had it all planned out. I can't let him do this to someone else." The next few weeks were the most challenging of my life. I had to wake up every morning next to a man I now knew was a criminal, smile at him over coffee, and pretend I didn't know he was actively planning my destruction. Marcus, meanwhile, seemed increasingly confident that his plan was working perfectly. He started bringing up Seattle more frequently, painting pictures of the amazing life we could build there. He showed me apartment listings in expensive neighborhoods, talked about how much money his new position would pay, and suggested I could take a break from working while we got settled. "You've been so stressed with the freelance hustle," he said one evening, wrapping his arms around me from behind while I cooked dinner. "Wouldn't it be nice to just relax for a while? Let me take care of everything." The manipulation was so transparent now that I could barely stand his touch, but I forced myself to smile and play along. That does sound tempting, but what about my clients here? I can't just abandon them. "Elena, be realistic," Marcus said, and I could hear the edge creeping into his voice. "Most of your clients are small businesses. They'll find other designers. This is about our future, our financial security. Sometimes you have to prioritize what's really important." What he didn't know was that I'd already started preparing for the aftermath. I'd quietly secured backup contracts with my most important clients, set up new business accounts he couldn't access, and moved my most valuable design assets to secure servers. If Marcus wanted to play strategic games, I'd learned from the best, him. The breakthrough came 3 weeks later. Agent Walsh called me while Marcus was at work. "We've got them," he said, simply. "Rebecca Chen made contact with a third company yesterday, trying to sell them information about an upcoming campaign from Marcus's current employer. We have audio, video, and financial records of the transaction." What does this mean? It means we have enough evidence to arrest both of them. We're moving tomorrow morning. Marcus will be arrested at his office, Rebecca at hers. You need to be somewhere safe when this happens. My heart was pounding. After weeks of pretending, of living this lie, it was finally going to end. What about the divorce? That's entirely up to you, but I'd recommend waiting until after the criminal case is resolved. The evidence we've gathered will be very relevant to any divorce proceedings. That evening, Marcus came home with flowers and a bottle of expensive wine. "I have news," he said, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. "The Seattle opportunity is moving faster than expected. I'm putting in my 2 weeks' notice tomorrow." I looked at him standing there, so pleased with himself, so confident in his deception. In less than 12 hours, FBI agents would walk into his office and arrest him for federal crimes. His carefully constructed plan would crumble in minutes, and the life he'd built on lies and theft would disappear forever. "That's wonderful, honey," I said, accepting his kiss on the cheek. "I can't wait to see what tomorrow brings." For the first time in months, I wasn't lying. I was sitting in Lisa's law office downtown when my phone rang at 10:47 a.m. Agent Walsh's voice was calm, but I could hear the satisfaction underneath. "It's done. Marcus Thompson and Rebecca Chen are both in federal custody. The arrests went smoothly." My hands were shaking as I set the phone down. After weeks of living a double life, pretending everything was normal while building a federal case against my own husband, it was finally over. Lisa poured me a glass of water and sat across from her desk. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Terrified," I admitted, and relieved, and angry, all at the same time. Within hours, the story was everywhere. Marcus's company, Pinnacle Marketing Group, issued a statement about cooperating fully with federal investigators. The local business news picked up the story of corporate espionage and arrested employees. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with calls from reporters, former colleagues, and people I hadn't heard from in years. But the call that mattered came at 2 p.m. from Marcus himself, from the Federal Detention Center. His voice was completely different from the confident, manipulative tone I'd grown used to. He sounded broken. "Elena, you have to help me," he said, without any greeting. "There's been a huge misunderstanding. These charges are insane. You know I would never do anything like what they're saying." The audacity was breathtaking. Even caught red-handed with overwhelming evidence, he was still trying to manipulate me. "Marcus, they have recordings of your voice discussing the crimes. They have financial records, emails, everything." "Someone set me up," he insisted. "Rebecca, maybe, or someone at the company who wanted to get rid of me. Elena, you know me. You know I'm not capable of this." I almost laughed. The man who had systematically planned to destroy my life, steal my clients, and leave me financially ruined was asking me to believe he was innocent? I know exactly who you are, Marcus. That's why I'm not helping you. The silence stretched between us before he spoke again. And now I heard the real Marcus. Cold, calculating, threatening. You'll regret this, Alina. When all this gets sorted out, you'll come crawling back begging for forgiveness. You need me more than you think. I hung up without responding. Even facing federal prison, he still believed he could intimidate and control me. That delusion would serve him poorly in the coming months. The next few days brought a parade of investigators to my door. The FBI wanted detailed statements about everything I'd discovered. Marcus's company, Pinnacle Marketing Group, sent their legal team to interview me about his access to client information. The IRS opened their own investigation into the offshore accounts and unreported income. But the most interesting visitor was Thomas Chen, Rebecca's ex-husband. He showed up at my door on Thursday evening, a tall man with kind eyes who looked like he hadn't slept in days. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said. "I know this is probably the last thing you want to deal with right now, but I think we need to talk." Over coffee in my kitchen, Thomas revealed that Rebecca had been planning to leave him for months, gradually moving money out of their joint accounts and preparing to disappear. She told me she was starting her own consulting business, needed capital to get established. I believed her because I wanted our marriage to work. "How long were you married?" 8 years, 2 kids. His voice cracked slightly. "They're asking me questions about money I never knew existed, business dealings I never heard about. Elena, I think our spouses have been planning this for much longer than anyone realizes." Thomas pulled out a folder of documents he'd found in Rebecca's home office. Bank statements, property records, and business licenses that painted a picture of preparation going back almost 2 years. They hadn't just been stealing information and money, they'd been building an entirely new life together, complete with shell companies, overseas investments, and fake identities prepared for their eventual escape. "Look at this," Thomas said, pointing to a property deed. "She bought a house in Vancouver under a different name 18 months ago, paid cash." The scope of their deception was staggering. This wasn't just corporate espionage, it was a long-term plan to disappear with stolen money and start over in another country. Marcus's talk about Seattle had been a lie to throw me off the trail. Their real destination was Canada, where extradition laws would make it harder for federal prosecutors to reach them. "There's something else," Thomas said quietly. "I found airline reservations in fake names for next week. 2 tickets to Vancouver, then connections to somewhere in Europe. If the FBI hadn't moved when they did, they would have been gone. All the evidence, all the stolen money, all the lies would have disappeared across international borders, leaving Thomas and me to pick up the pieces of their carefully orchestrated destruction." That night, I called Agent Walsh to share what Thomas had discovered. "This changes everything," Walsh said after reviewing the documents. "We're not just looking at corporate espionage anymore. This is organized fraud with intent to flee prosecution. The charges just got much more serious." "What does that mean for the case?" "It means Marcus and Rebecca are looking at significantly more prison time, and the possibility of recovering the stolen assets just got much better. International flight risk elevates this to a different level entirely." The next morning brought another surprise visitor, Jake Morrison, the notary who'd helped Marcus forge documents for the hidden mortgage. He looked terrible, unshaven and anxious, clutching a briefcase like his life depended on it. "Alina, I need to talk to you," he said, "about Marcus, about what I did. I think I'm in serious trouble." Jake explained how Marcus had approached him months earlier with what seemed like routine paperwork. He said you were busy with work and he was handling the refinancing details. "I'd notarized documents for friends before. It seemed normal." But as the requests became more frequent and the amounts involved grew larger, Jake realized he was being pulled into something much bigger than simple paperwork. When I started asking questions, Marcus reminded me that I could lose my license, face fraud charges myself. He made me feel trapped. Jake opened his briefcase and pulled out copies of every document he'd notarized for Marcus. Mortgage papers, loan applications, asset transfers, business formation documents, a paper trail that showed the systematic theft of our marital assets had been going on for over a year. I kept copies of everything because something felt wrong, Jake said. When I saw the news about his arrest, I knew I had to come forward. I want to cooperate with the FBI, make this right. I looked at Jake, another victim of Marcus's manipulation, and felt something I hadn't expected: sympathy. You need to call Agent Walsh immediately. The fact that you're coming forward voluntarily will help you. As Jake left with Agent Walsh's contact information, I realized that Marcus's web of deception was still unraveling. Every day brought new evidence, new victims, new revelations about the scope of his crimes. The man I thought I married was revealing himself to be someone far more calculating and dangerous than I'd ever imagined. But there was one more surprise coming that would change everything, including how the divorce proceedings would unfold when Marcus finally realized that his carefully laid plans hadn't just failed, they'd backfired spectacularly. 3 months after Marcus's arrest, I found myself sitting in family court facing the man I'd once promised to love forever. He looked different now. Thinner, wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of his usual expensive suits, with dark circles under his eyes and a pallor that spoke of sleepless nights and federal detention. His attorney, Richard Vasquez, was a high-priced criminal defense lawyer who specialized in white-collar crimes. Marcus's family had mortgaged everything they owned to afford him, convinced that their golden boy son was the victim of some elaborate frame job. They still believed his story about being set up, despite the mountain of evidence to the contrary.
Judge Patricia Harrison entered the courtroom with the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen every kind of family dispute imaginable. She was in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back severely and sharp eyes that missed nothing. I'd heard she had a reputation for cutting through lies and getting to the truth quickly. "This is a dissolution of marriage hearing," Judge Harrison began, "but I understand there are some unusual circumstances surrounding this case." Marcus's lawyer stood up immediately. "Your Honor, my client maintains his innocence regarding the federal charges, which are completely separate from these divorce proceedings. Mr. Thompson is asking for a fair division of marital assets and spousal support during this difficult time." I almost choked. Spousal support. The man who had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from his own company and planned to leave me buried in debt was asking me to support him financially while he sat in federal prison. Lisa rose from the table beside me. "Your Honor, we have significant evidence that Mr. Thompson systematically defrauded his wife and attempted to hide marital assets in preparation for an abandonment that was planned over 2 years ago." "I'd like to hear this evidence," Judge Harrison said, settling back in her chair with an expression that suggested she was prepared for a long morning. Lisa opened the thick manila folder we'd prepared. "Your Honor, this case involves not just adultery and abandonment, but organized criminal activity designed to defraud Mrs. Thompson of her rightful share of marital assets." She began with the offshore accounts, presenting bank records showing Marcus had funneled over $300,000 in stolen money into accounts Elena couldn't access. Then came the forged mortgage documents that would have left me responsible for debt on a house Marcus planned to abandon. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Lisa continued, "Mr. Thompson and his co-conspirator planned to steal Mrs. Thompson's client database and professional relationships, effectively destroying the business she built over 8 years. Marcus leaned over to whisper something to his attorney, but Vasquez held up a hand to quiet him. I could see Marcus's face reddening as each piece of evidence was presented. This wasn't going according to whatever script he'd imagined. Judge Harrison examined the documents carefully. "These are serious allegations. Mr. Vasquez, how does your client respond to evidence of hidden assets and planned abandonment?" "Your Honor, these federal charges are still pending trial. My client hasn't been convicted of any crimes. This evidence is prejudicial and shouldn't be considered in a civil divorce proceeding." "Actually," Judge Harrison said dryly, "evidence of a spouse hiding marital assets is entirely relevant to divorce proceedings, regardless of pending criminal charges." She looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Thompson, did you open offshore bank accounts without your wife's knowledge? Marcus stood up, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the old confidence. Your Honor, I was trying to protect our assets, to secure our financial future. Everything I did was for both of us. By stealing from your employer and planning to abandon your wife with fraudulent debt? Judge Harrison's voice was ice cold. Mr. Thompson, I've reviewed the evidence presented today, and I find your explanation not only implausible, but insulting to this court's intelligence. Lisa then presented the coup de grace, the recorded conversations between Marcus and Rebecca discussing their timeline for my destruction. Judge Harrison listened to several minutes of audio, her expression growing increasingly severe. You'll be crawling back begging for forgiveness, Marcus's voice filled the courtroom through the speakers. Elena's always been too trusting, too soft. By the time she realizes what's happening, we'll be set up in our new life. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus had gone pale, finally realizing that his own words were condemning him. His lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Judge Harrison removed her glasses and cleaned them slowly, a gesture that somehow felt more ominous than any shouting could have been. When she put them back on, her gaze fixed on Marcus with laser intensity. Mr. Thompson, in 32 years on this bench, I have rarely encountered such calculated cruelty toward a spouse. You didn't just commit adultery, you orchestrated a systematic plan to destroy your wife financially, professionally, and emotionally. She opened the manila envelope that contained her written decision. This court finds that Mr. Thompson engaged in economic misconduct, adultery, and abandonment. All marital assets hidden in offshore accounts are to be returned to Mrs. Thompson immediately. The mortgage fraudulently taken out on the marital home is the sole responsibility of Mr. Thompson. Marcus started to stand, but his lawyer pulled him back down. Judge Harrison wasn't finished. Furthermore, Mr. Thompson is ordered to pay Mrs. Thompson's legal fees, business losses incurred due to his actions, and punitive damages in the amount of $150,000 for his deliberate attempt to defraud her of marital assets. The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. Combined with the stolen money he'd have to return and the fraudulent mortgage he'd be responsible for, he was looking at financial ruin even if he somehow avoided federal prison. But, Your Honor, Vasquez tried to interject, my client is currently incarcerated and has no income. Then perhaps Mr. Thompson should have considered that consequence before embarking on his criminal enterprise, Judge Harrison cut him off. The court also grants Mrs. Thompson an immediate divorce on grounds of adultery and abandonment. Mr. Thompson, you have forfeited any right to spousal support or shared assets through your own criminal conduct. As the judge's gavel came down with finality, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I'd been carrying for over a year. Marcus turned to look at me for the first time during the hearing, and the expression on his face was everything I could have hoped for: shock, disbelief, and the dawning realization that his victim had become his downfall. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Lisa wrapped me in a hug. How does it feel to be a free woman? Like I can breathe again, I said, and meant it completely. 6 months later, Marcus was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to multiple counts of corporate espionage, money laundering, and fraud. Rebecca received 12 years and was ordered to pay restitution to all the companies they defrauded. Thomas Chen and I became unlikely friends, bonding over the shared experience of discovering we'd been married to master manipulators. Jake Morrison received probation in exchange for his cooperation and testimony.
As for me, my design business flourished after the publicity from the case brought me national attention. Clients appreciated working with someone who'd stood up to corruption and won. I bought a new house with the recovered stolen money and started each morning grateful for the bullet I'd dodged. Sometimes people ask me if I regret exposing Marcus, if I feel bad about the prison sentence that destroyed his life. The answer is simple. Marcus destroyed his own life the moment he chose to build it on lies and theft. I just made sure he couldn't take me down with him. The man who thought I'd come crawling back begging for forgiveness learned the hard way that underestimating your victim is the most dangerous mistake a predator can make. The media attention following the divorce hearing was unlike anything I'd experienced. My phone rang constantly with interview requests from business magazines, legal journals, and even a few true crime podcasts wanting to feature our story. Lisa advised me to be selective, choosing only reputable outlets that would focus on the business fraud aspects rather than sensationalizing the personal drama. The interview that changed everything came from Sandra Williams at Pacific Business Weekly. She was interested in how I'd managed to build evidence against a sophisticated criminal operation while maintaining my own business and sanity. During our conversation, she mentioned that several other women had reached out to her with similar stories of financial manipulation by spouses. Elena, I think you've uncovered something bigger than just your individual case, Sandra said. There's a pattern here of successful men using their business knowledge to systematically defraud their wives before divorcing them. Would you be interested in helping other women who might be going through similar situations? That conversation planted a seed that would grow into something I never expected. Within weeks, I was receiving emails and calls from women across the country who suspected their husbands of hiding assets, manipulating finances, or preparing to leave them financially devastated. Each story had unique details, but the underlying patterns were disturbingly similar. One woman, Jennifer Park from Denver, discovered her husband had been slowly transferring money from their joint investment accounts into cryptocurrency wallets she couldn't access. Another, Michelle Rodriguez from Phoenix, found out her husband had taken out multiple business loans using their house as collateral, then funneled the money into overseas accounts. I feel so stupid, Jennifer said during one of our phone calls. The signs were all there, but he made me feel like I was being paranoid for asking questions about our finances. That's exactly what they count on, I replied. They use our trust against us, make us doubt our own instincts. You're not stupid. You were being systematically manipulated by someone who knew exactly how to exploit your loyalty. Working with Lisa, I started developing resources for women in similar situations. We created a checklist of warning signs, a guide for documenting financial irregularities, and a network of attorneys and forensic accountants who specialized in uncovering hidden assets. What started as informal advice became a legitimate consulting service. The most rewarding case came 6 months after my divorce was finalized. Dr. Sarah Kim, a successful pediatrician from Seattle, contacted me after discovering suspicious activity in her practice's business accounts. Her husband, Michael, was her practice manager, and she'd noticed discrepancies in their financial reports that he couldn't adequately explain. He keeps telling me I don't understand business finances, that I should focus on medicine and let him handle the money side, Sarah said. But I'm not an idiot. Numbers don't lie. Using the techniques I'd learned from my own investigation, we uncovered a scheme where Michael had been billing insurance companies for services never provided, then routing the fraudulent payments through shell companies he'd created. He was essentially using Sarah's medical license to commit insurance fraud while positioning himself to claim the practice's assets in a planned divorce. The evidence we gathered led to Michael's arrest for insurance fraud and embezzlement. Sarah not only saved her medical practice, but also helped federal investigators uncover a larger network of healthcare fraud that Michael had been coordinating with other corrupt practice managers. You saved my career and probably kept me out of federal prison, Sarah told me. If I'd waited much longer, the authorities would have thought I was complicit in the fraud. Meanwhile, my design business was experiencing unprecedented growth. The publicity from the case had attracted clients who specifically sought me out because of my reputation for integrity and attention to detail. Corporate clients appreciated working with someone who'd proven capable of uncovering complex deceptions and standing up to powerful adversaries. One particularly satisfying contract came from Pinnacle Marketing Group, Marcus's former employer. They hired me to redesign their corporate identity and website as part of their effort to rebuild trust with clients after the scandal. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved. Elena, we want you to know that the entire leadership team admires how you handled this situation, said CEO David Martinez. Your courage in exposing this fraud saved our company millions in additional losses and helped us identify security vulnerabilities we didn't know existed. But the most unexpected development came from an investigation by the Federal Trade Commission. Agent Walsh contacted me 8 months after Marcus's sentencing with news that the case had opened doors to a much larger inquiry into corporate espionage networks operating across multiple industries. Elena, the information Marcus and Rebecca were stealing wasn't just going to competitors. Agent Walsh explained during a meeting at FBI headquarters, they were part of a sophisticated network selling corporate secrets to foreign companies, particularly in China and Eastern Europe. Your case was the thread that unraveled an international economic espionage operation. The scope was staggering. The FBI had identified at least 15 other couples in different cities operating similar schemes, stealing corporate information, laundering money through shell companies, and preparing to leave the country with stolen assets and trade secrets. The investigation, dubbed Operation Corporate Cupid, had become one of the largest economic espionage cases in FBI history.
We need you to testify before a grand jury about how you uncovered the evidence, Agent Walsh said. Your methodical documentation of financial fraud is helping us understand how these networks operate and recruit participants. The grand jury testimony was intimidating but empowering. I spent 3 hours explaining to 23 strangers how I discovered and documented Marcus's crimes, walking them through bank records, recordings, and forged documents. Several jurors asked detailed questions about the emotional manipulation tactics Marcus had used, clearly recognizing similar patterns in other cases they'd heard. 2 weeks later, the grand jury returned indictments against 47 individuals across 12 states, all connected to the international espionage network. Marcus and Rebecca's small-time corporate theft had exposed a criminal enterprise worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Thomas Chen called me the day the indictments were announced. "Elena, did you see the news? They're saying Rebecca was recruiting other women to marry targets in different companies. Our spouses weren't just cheating, they were part of something that sounds like a spy novel." Indeed, the FBI had uncovered evidence that Rebecca had been identifying successful businessmen with access to valuable corporate information, then introducing them to women trained to seduce, marry, and manipulate them into criminal partnerships. The operation had been running for at least 5 years before Marcus and Rebecca got careless enough to be caught. The irony, I told Thomas, is that Marcus probably thought he was the mastermind. He had no idea he was just another mark being used by people much more sophisticated than he was. A year after my divorce, I was invited to speak at the National Association of Women Business Owners annual conference. Standing before an audience of 800 successful women, I shared the story of how investigation and persistence had not only saved my own life, but helped expose a criminal network that threatened businesses across the country. The most important lesson I learned, I told the audience, is that trust doesn't mean blind faith. Real partnership means transparency, shared decision-making, and mutual respect for each other's intelligence. When someone tries to exclude you from decisions about your own life, that's not protection, that's control. The standing ovation I received wasn't just for my story, but for the reminder that knowledge is power, and that victims can become victors when they refuse to accept the roles others try to force them into. Marcus had underestimated me because he saw only what he wanted to see. That blindness hadn't just cost him his freedom, it had exposed an entire criminal network and helped dozens of other women escape similar fates. As I looked out at those hundreds of faces, I realized that Marcus's betrayal had led to something he never could have imagined. It had made me stronger, more successful, and more determined to help others than I'd ever been before. 2 years after my divorce was finalized, I received a letter that I never expected. It was from Marcus, written from his federal prison cell in Colorado. The handwriting was different, smaller, and more careful, as if he'd lost the bold confidence that once defined every aspect of his life. The letter was 8 pages long, filled with what appeared to be genuine remorse and detailed explanations of how he'd gotten involved with the espionage network. According to Marcus, Rebecca had approached him at an industry conference 3 years earlier, claiming to be interested in starting a legitimate consulting partnership. The romantic relationship developed gradually, along with what she presented as minor competitive intelligence gathering. "Elena," the letter read, "I know you'll probably never believe this, but I didn't understand the full scope of what I was getting into until it was too late. Rebecca had handlers, people I never met who were directing everything. By the time I realized I was part of something much bigger and more dangerous, they had enough evidence to destroy me if I tried to back out." I showed the letter to Agent Walsh during one of our regular check-ins about the ongoing federal cases. He read it carefully, then set it down with a grim expression.
Elena, Marcus might actually be telling the truth about this part, Walsh said. We've learned a lot more about how this network operated. They specifically targeted men with access to valuable information who also had personal vulnerabilities, failing marriages, financial pressure, gambling problems. Marcus fit their profile perfectly. The FBI had discovered that the espionage network used sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques to recruit and control their assets. Rebecca hadn't just been Marcus's lover and criminal partner, she'd been his handler, trained to exploit his weaknesses and gradually escalate his involvement in increasingly serious crimes. That doesn't excuse what he did to you, Walsh continued, but it does explain how someone without a criminal background could get pulled into international espionage. These people are professionals at manipulation. Reading Marcus's letter, I found myself feeling something I hadn't expected. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of detached pity. The man who had seemed so confident and in control had actually been another victim of the same network that had tried to destroy me. The difference was that I'd fought back, while he'd allowed himself to be used. But the most significant revelation came in the letter's final pages. Marcus revealed the location of additional evidence he'd hidden in a storage unit in Vancouver, evidence that could help convict the network's leadership and recover millions in stolen assets. I'm giving you this information, Marcus wrote, not because I expect forgiveness, but because you're the only person I trust to make sure it gets to the right people. You proved you care more about justice than revenge. I hope someday that will matter for something. Agent Walsh immediately contacted his counterparts in Canadian law enforcement. The storage unit contained computers, financial records, and communication devices that provided the missing links between the American operations and the international leadership. The evidence Marcus had hidden became crucial in convicting the network's top figures, including Rebecca's handlers who had orchestrated the entire operation. The final trials took place 18 months later. I was called as a witness in the prosecution of Viktor Petrov, the Russian national who had been directing the North American operations. Sitting in federal court, looking at this unassuming man in his 50s who had masterminded the destruction of so many lives, I felt the last pieces of anger finally leave my system.
Mrs. Thompson, the prosecutor asked, in your opinion, was your ex-husband the architect of the crimes committed against you, or was he following directions from others? I looked at Marcus, who was testifying for the prosecution under a cooperation agreement. He looked older, grayer, diminished in ways that had nothing to do with the prison uniform. Then I looked at Petrov, whose cold eyes showed no remorse whatsoever. I believe my ex-husband made terrible choices that hurt me deeply, I said, but I also believe he was manipulated by people who saw him as a useful tool, not a partner. That doesn't excuse his actions, but it does explain them. Petrov was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Rebecca received an additional 10 years on top of her original sentence for her role as a handler. Marcus's cooperation and the evidence he provided reduced his sentence to 8 years, with the possibility of parole in 6. After the final verdicts, Agent Walsh walked with me out of the courthouse. Elena, I want you to know that this case changed how the FBI approaches economic espionage investigations. The techniques you developed for documenting financial fraud are now part of our training programs. It was a gratifying end to a chapter of my life that had begun with personal betrayal and evolved into something much larger. The consulting business I'd started to help other women had grown into a legitimate company with 12 employees, including forensic accountants, private investigators, and legal specialists. We'd helped over 200 women uncover hidden assets and escape financially abusive marriages. Dr. Sarah Kim had joined my company as a medical consultant, helping us identify healthcare fraud schemes targeting physician spouses. Thomas Chen contributed his expertise in international banking, having discovered a talent for tracing hidden assets through complex offshore networks. We're like a support group that solves crimes, Sarah joked during one of our monthly team meetings. Who would have thought that surviving marriage to criminals would be such good preparation for a career in investigation? The personal satisfaction came from individual success stories.
Women like Jennifer Park, who used our techniques to uncover her husband's cryptocurrency fraud and ended up receiving a settlement that set her up for life. Michelle Rodriguez, whose husband's business loan scheme was exposed before he could flee to Mexico with their life savings. Dozens of others who discovered the truth before it was too late to protect themselves. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came during a conference call with a group of federal prosecutors who were using our methods in a new case. They were investigating a network of military contractors whose wives had discovered evidence of fraud in defense contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Mrs. Thompson, the lead prosecutor said, the investigation techniques you developed from your personal situation have become a model for how civilian witnesses can effectively gather evidence in complex white-collar crimes. You've essentially created a new field, victim-led financial investigation. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized that Marcus did me the biggest favor of my life by underestimating me so completely. His assumption that I was too soft, too trusting to fight back was the fatal flaw in his plan. He saw only the person he wanted me to be, not the person I actually was. The woman who discovered that safety deposit box 3 years ago was someone who'd never imagined she could take on international criminals and win. But necessity had revealed strengths I didn't know I possessed. Marcus's betrayal had been the catalyst for discovering not just his crimes, but my own capabilities. On the 3rd anniversary of our divorce, I received one final letter from Marcus. It was short, just 2 paragraphs, but the words carried weight that his previous lengthy explanation had lacked. Elena, I saw the news about the company you've built and the people you've helped. I'm proud of you, even though I have no right to feel proud of anything connected to your life. You became the person I pretended to be, someone who actually stands up for what's right. I hope someday you can remember that there was a time when I loved you, before I lost myself completely. I kept that letter, not out of sentiment, but as a reminder. It represented the final proof that the man who had once threatened me with crawling back begging for forgiveness had finally understood exactly who had won our battle, and why he had never stood a chance against the woman he'd so completely underestimated. The best revenge, as they say, is living well. And I was living very well indeed. 5 years after that first discovery in the safety deposit box, my life looked nothing like what Marcus had envisioned for me. Instead of the broken, financially ruined woman he'd planned to leave behind, I was standing in my own corporate headquarters in downtown Portland, looking out at a team of investigators who had just closed their 100th case. The company, Guardian Financial Investigations, occupied an entire floor of a prestigious office building. We had contracts with law enforcement agencies in 12 states, partnerships with major law firms, and a waiting list of clients that stretched 6 months out. What had started as a desperate attempt to save myself had evolved into a thriving enterprise that employed 43 people and generated millions in annual revenue. My assistant, Patricia Valdez, knocked on my office door. Elena, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's urgent. The woman who walked into my office looked familiar, though I couldn't immediately place her. She was in her 40s, well-dressed, but with the haunted expression I'd learned to recognize in women who suspected their marriages were built on lies. Mrs. Thompson, my name is Catherine Walsh. I'm Agent David Walsh's sister-in-law. The connection clicked immediately. Agent Walsh had mentioned his brother's wife was going through a difficult divorce. David said you might be able to help me, but he couldn't get officially involved because of family relationships. Catherine's story unfolded like a twisted variation on themes I'd heard dozens of times before. Her husband, Dr. Alan Walsh, was a prominent plastic surgeon who'd been gradually isolating her from friends and family while taking control of all their financial decisions. But the red flags in her case were different from the usual hidden assets and secret accounts. He's been pushing me to get extensive cosmetic surgery, Catherine explained. Facelifts, body contouring, procedures I don't want or need. When I refused, he became incredibly angry, saying I was embarrassing him in front of his colleagues. The more Catherine talked, the more disturbed I became. Dr. Walsh wasn't just controlling his wife's finances. He was trying to physically transform her appearance while systematically destroying her self-esteem. But there was something else, something that made my investigative instincts prickle with alarm. Catherine, has your husband ever discussed his other patients with you? Mentioned specific procedures or outcomes? Her face darkened. That's part of what worries me. He's been taking a lot of photos of his work lately, spending hours in his home office uploading them to some kind of secure server. When I asked about it, he said it was for medical conferences, but he became very defensive. Within a week, our investigation revealed that Dr. Walsh was running an illegal operation, selling before and after photos of his patients to overseas medical tourism companies without patient consent. He was also performing experimental procedures that hadn't been approved by medical boards, documenting the results for research he was selling to pharmaceutical companies. But the most disturbing discovery came when we traced his financial records. Dr. Walsh had been systematically photographing his female patients during procedures when they were unconscious, then selling these images to private collectors who paid premium prices for what they believed were consensual photos. This isn't just financial fraud, I told Agent Walsh during an emergency meeting. Your brother-in-law is committing sexual exploitation of unconscious patients. This needs to involve federal investigators immediately. The case broke open when we found Dr. Walsh's encrypted hard drives, which contained thousands of photos and videos of patients who had no idea they were being recorded. The FBI's Crimes Against Children unit got involved when some of the victims turned out to be minors whose parents had brought them in for reconstructive surgery after accidents. Dr. Walsh was arrested at his clinic during a routine consultation, surrounded by FBI agents while a patient waited in the next room. The charges included sexual exploitation, violation of medical privacy laws, insurance fraud, and distribution of non-consensual intimate images across state lines. Catherine Walsh became one of my strongest advocates, joining the company as a client services director, specializing in cases involving professional misconduct by spouses. Her medical knowledge and personal experience made her invaluable in identifying healthcare-related fraud schemes. Elena saved my life and my sanity, Catherine said during a television interview about the case. But more than that, she showed me that being victimized doesn't define you. How you respond to it does. The Dr. Walsh case led to a broader investigation into medical professionals who were exploiting their positions for financial gain and personal gratification. Our company became the go-to resource for attorneys and law enforcement agencies dealing with healthcare fraud cases involving family relationships. But perhaps the most satisfying development came when Rebecca Chen contacted me from federal prison. She wanted to cooperate with our investigation into other espionage networks, hoping that her information might reduce her sentence. The meeting took place in the prison visiting room, with Agent Walsh and Lisa present as witnesses. Rebecca looked nothing like the confident woman I'd seen kissing my husband outside our front door years earlier. Prison had aged her considerably, and there was a defeated quality to her posture that suggested she'd finally understood the magnitude of her crimes. "Elena, I want you to know that I never hated you personally," she said. "You were just an obstacle to remove. It wasn't personal." The casual way she described the planned destruction of my life revealed exactly who Rebecca really was. Someone who saw other people as objects to be manipulated or eliminated as convenient. Her cooperation provided valuable intelligence, but I felt no sympathy for her situation. "Rebecca, you had choices at every step," I replied. "You chose to seduce my husband, steal from his company, and plan to destroy my life. The consequences you're facing now are the direct result of those choices." Her information helped us identify 3 other active espionage cells operating in different industries. The arrests that followed disrupted networks targeting defense contractors, pharmaceutical companies, and technology firms. Each investigation revealed new victims, wives, husbands, and family members who had been unknowingly living with criminals. The work was emotionally demanding but deeply rewarding. Every case we solved meant someone else wouldn't have to experience the betrayal and devastation I'd gone through. Every hidden asset we uncovered meant a victim could rebuild their life with dignity and financial security.
The 5-year anniversary of my divorce coincided with the publication of my book, Hidden in Plain Sight: How to Investigate Financial Fraud in Your Own Home. It became a bestseller not just because of the dramatic story it told, but because it provided practical tools for people who suspected they were being financially manipulated. The book tour took me to cities across the country where I spoke to audiences of women who saw themselves in my story. But the most powerful moments came during the question and answer sessions, when women would stand up and share their own experiences of discovering lies and finding the courage to fight back. In Chicago, a woman named Maria Santos discovered her husband's gambling addiction and the second mortgage he'd taken out to fund his losses. In Atlanta, Jennifer Kim revealed how she'd discovered her husband was using their joint business to launder money for organized crime. Each story was different, but the underlying themes remained constant: deception, manipulation, and the power of evidence to reveal truth. The most important thing I learned, I told each audience, is that intuition is usually right. If something feels wrong with your finances, your relationship, or your partner's behavior, trust that feeling and investigate it. The truth might be painful, but it's always better than living a lie. As I stood in my office that evening, looking out at the city lights of Portland, I thought about how completely my life had changed. Marcus had planned to break me and defeat me from nothing. Instead, his betrayal had revealed strengths I never knew I possessed and led to a career I never could have imagined. My phone buzzed with a text message from Thomas Chen, who was now running the international division of our company from his base in Vancouver. Elena just closed the Peterson case, another $2.3 million in hidden assets recovered. This one's going to make national news. The Peterson case involved a tech executive who'd been selling proprietary software to Chinese competitors while planning to divorce his wife and claim poverty. Our investigation had uncovered not just the hidden money, but a sophisticated intellectual property theft operation that threatened national security.
Each success built on the lessons learned from my own experience. Every technique we'd developed, every investigative method we'd refined, traced back to that desperate search through Marcus's belongings, looking for evidence of his betrayal. What had started as self-preservation had become a systematic approach to uncovering financial deception. The irony wasn't lost on me that Marcus, in his arrogance and carelessness, had created the very tools that would be used to expose dozens of other criminals like him. His assumption that I was too trusting to fight back had been the fatal flaw that not only destroyed his own plans, but provided the blueprint for helping countless other victims. Looking back at that terrified woman who discovered a safety deposit box key in her husband's dresser, I barely recognized her. That woman had been living in fear, doubting her own perceptions, accepting explanations that made no sense because she wanted to believe her marriage was real. The woman I'd become understood that real strength isn't about never being deceived. It's about what you do when you discover the deception. Marcus had counted on my compliance and silence. Instead, he'd unleashed something far more dangerous to criminals everywhere. A victim who refused to stay victimized and who dedicated her life to making sure others wouldn't have to. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.